Okay, so good afternoon. Welcome to this online talk. The subject of the talk is Digital Utopia, Digital Dystopia. It is a look forward at what we can expect from our society, environment, economy from 2030 and onwards to 2040. It is not supposed to be some kind of a blueprint. It's not supposed to be some kind of a guideline. It's an extrapolation of trends that we see incredibly visibly today and which have been, I would say, very well established for the past 10 years at least, and which we see now accelerating. So what I want to do is essentially share some ideas, share some maybe insights into how we see certain sectors evolving and certain practices evolving. And I'll do that by means of a presentation. So I'll share my screen with you. And what I'd like to do is just go through the presentation and then leave a lot of time at the end for questions and discussion. I have a list of questions which are, I think, of general interests and which help us understand, what's going on. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please, there's a good point in the flow to ask. Please go ahead, and we'll try to start. We'll try to clear up whatever it is that we need to look at. The slides will be distributed at the end, and I believe this session is also being recorded. So what I'd like to do is now go ahead and share the screen. So the title is, I think, familiar to anyone who has studied maybe some literature. The concept of a utopia was written about fairly extensively by Thomas More and others throughout history. And I'm using this idea of the utopia as a reflection of the fact that when we talk about startups today and when we talk about technology, we tend to focus on the positive aspects of it and on the disruptive aspects of it. Just like a mirror image, though, there is, in many cases, equally a downside, a dystopia. So a situation where the very facts which make something very, very positive to at least some people in a country, an environment, in a market can also make things extremely negative for other people. And I think if we look at the events we've seen, maybe over the past 3 or 4 years, and if we forecast some of the events going forward, I think we can see this very, very clearly. Progress does come at a price. When we talk about disruptive technologies, that is not just a term. Disruption is very real, and it expresses itself in, with very real impacts. So I think it's good that we kind of focus on the potential good and the potential bad of a situation, and I think it's important that we maintain our skepticism. Because thinking objectively and evaluating a situation as objectively as possible, or at least as honestly as possible, is something which is becoming much rarer and much more difficult in the society and in the economy that we live in. So we have a rather bizarre thesis, and it may sound rather bizarre, but it's something which is becoming increasingly prevalent. But we, and by this I mean my associates in my business and some of my closest business partners, we believe that in the near future, online interactions and the wider digital ecosystem will be more attractive to consumers and citizens than the real one. And what this means is that increasingly people will prefer to live online. Certainly they will prefer to transact online. They will prefer to create and work online, and eventually they will probably prefer to look at online means of delivery for a significant array of services, entertainment, education, and other benefits. Now, most of you are probably quite fed up with COVID, and like me, you can't wait to get out and live a normal life. But if we take COVID out of the mix, we see that this direction has basically been a one-way street since, for at least the past 10 years. And I'll try to give some examples of that. Right now, we're in 2021, and I believe that in the next 9 years, so by 2030, technology is going to reach a tipping point where we will consciously choose our existence, or we will have to constantly choose whether We want more human interaction or more virtual versus or technological interaction. But I believe very strongly that by 2040, if not earlier, that choice of a virtual or technological existence will dominate the choices we make. And together with some increases in other technologies, we're really looking at a fundamental question: what does it mean to be human? And today, I think we can all agree we are human mammals. We reproduce in a certain way. We have a genetic code. We have, the principles of evolution, molecular biology, and so on and so forth. But in a very short period of time, we will have done or have made such interventions at this level that we may be looking at a very different definition of the human species. Let's look at some very basic examples. And again, these I think are recognizable from anyone who is living in the world today. But I mean, why is it becoming more attractive online? Well, first of all, very simply, the quality of the inputs that we use to enter the virtual universe are getting better and better. So right now, 4K LED is basically a standard. 8K screens are entering the market. 12 to 16K screens are on the horizon. And this literally means that the image that you're going to get on one of these big screen TVs, despite the fact that it's a two-dimensional experience, is in many cases going to be far superior to what your own eye will see if you say go out onto the balcony and take a look outside, basically. The second point is that from a 2D screen or from a 2D input device, we're heading into an immersive 3D experience, and augmented and then immersive or virtual reality is already becoming very, very well established in a lot of B2B sectors. It's, I think, shortly going to become really revolutionizing the B2C sector. We are a long way from that, but Apple is coming out with some new products. Google is doing a lot of research in this area. And I believe that quite soon, all of us are going to have virtual reality goggles and an increasing array of products to experience on those goggles. But then finally, also because gamification and social media are already causing biochemical reactions. So there's been a lot of research in this area, both for gaming and for social media. And it's really clear that the human body adapts as a result to what it sees on the screen. So if you get a Facebook like, you get a dopamine reaction. If you, conversely, if you are shunned or bullied, or you encounter something negative on social media, that has a real direct impact on how you feel. So technology is leading us to an area where we want not just that concept of instant gratification, but we want that concept of self-validation. And so what we tend to do is we tend to stitch together through our own choices, in a way, a reality of how we want the world to see. And that is expressed, for instance, in social media, where you choose to read certain news media, you choose to ban or block certain people whose opinion you don't agree with. On Netflix, you tend to watch certain types of series. And we know this exists. We know that we live in such a filtered reality because, again, there's been a huge amount of research on it, but equivalently, there has been a huge amount of commercialization of this fact. So again, we're in an environment where not only is content delivered, not only are transactions delivered, but the impact is not just, say, through a credit card or with a delivery guy coming to your door with your dinner. There are biochemical impacts as well, and we become hooked to those biochemical impacts. Okay, we've also, I'm sure, understood that at least in the past 10 years, a lot of the transactions that we used to engage with in the real world are now no longer necessary and may even be disturbing. So for instance, I don't know about you, but I do all of my banking online, and every time I'm called to go into a bank, it is a disturbing experience. I'm heavily conscious that I'm wasting time. And that is even without the COVID impact, which is, generates a public health impact. But when I go into a bank line, I can understand that this entire process is relatively useless and could be replaced fairly easily. I don't know about you, but I've been doing all of my online travel bookings for the past 15 years online. The last time I had to speak to a travel agent was frankly a horrible experience, because the experience of booking online is much faster, much more accurate, and ultimately much more efficient. So a lot of these real world interactions, as strange as it seems, are becoming, I think, increasingly irrelevant. Certainly at the socioeconomic level or at the macro level, they're also becoming increasingly inefficient and expensive. And as we move forward, there are going to be more and more solutions to this basic question of, how is the tech world going to solve this last mile of human interaction? And what kind of startups and innovations are going to come up, in order to serve the transition between a more seamless virtual environment. Okay. There are also, though, clear social results. So I'm not saying that this is a perfect world. I'm saying it's a world in transition, and there are, I would say, as many negative effects to living in an online world as there are to an offline world. And the centerpiece of that photo is probably one we're all a little bit happy is over. The election of Donald Trump or other populists. We see that it is very easy today to disseminate fake news. It is very easy to do electoral manipulation online and manipulation of social media. And we see that people, because of the way they absorb information online, can no longer think critically. Part of that is what we see on the left. People can no longer read, they scan documentation online. People have more and more difficulty writing. And if you come from a society like Greece or Germany or France or Italy, where we have a very complex and very sophisticated written language, which very often dates 200 to 300 years in the past, you can tell that younger children have incredible difficulty in this environment because they simply don't need to write anymore for the large, in order to learn and for the large majority, I would say, of their interactions. So if you're typing with your friends on WhatsApp, you're not going to be using perfect French. You're going to be using slang, right? You're going to be using emojis and so on and so forth. But equally, people can no longer process complex sentences or reasoning because they have become used to transacting in a way, and by transacting here, I mean the absorption of data and the decisions made on the basis of that data, in a way which I think, is right now irrevocable. We cannot, and for those of you who have families, I think you know this very well, but we cannot take the smartphones away. We cannot take the tablets away. We cannot drag our kids away from the computer screen. The screens are here to stay, basically. And that is leading to, I think, again, irreversible biological impacts on how we deal with information and how we perceive truth, basically. Finally, we also know that prolonged use of social media results in depression and negative self-image. There's a ton of research on this. It's probably something which is, not very well disseminated or not very well recognized. But, in many cases, the more social media you absorb, the more damage you're absorbing in terms of how you react to certain things and how your own body reacts to certain scenarios online. So again, we're seeing these social results. A lot of research is going into them. As a society and as a polity, we still have not made the decision on what to do about this. And in fact, the standard decision setting seems to be, like the proverbial ostrich, bury your head in the sand and, just hope the problem goes away by itself. Now, you recall in 1999, there was this amazing film called The Matrix. And the idea of The Matrix is that we were essentially captives who were harnessed for energy. And in order to keep us captive, an elaborate digital world was engineered, and that world included heuristic impacts and heuristic reactions in the very brain and, the spinal column and other parts of the body. So, the moral of the Matrix is that we need to be very careful about how we perceive reality. Well, in fact, if I had to make a prediction today, I would say that we don't need to even worry about something so advanced. I think the matrix is already here, and this is what it looks like. It looks like a classic family of four, each with its own computer screen or phone screen. And yeah, probably I sound like a bitter old man or something like this. But the idea of how a family communicates, how a family coexists, how the fact that the family was supposed to be at the foundation of our civilization, of our economy, of our social order, and so on and so forth. If it is now no longer the family, but it is the family plus a digital data pipe, which is, you know, importing and exporting all kinds of content, all kinds of services, all kinds of films and games and other realities, then you know, we have to question what exactly are we getting ourselves into. And you know, like me, if you have children, you know exactly how convenient it is when you have a screaming 2-year-old or 3-year-old to give them the phone and you know, call up YouTube and watch kiddie videos or whatever. And again, this is something which we are doing. Very few of us are questioning, because so far the convenience simply far outweighs any kind of negative impacts that we're prepared to deal with. And I think that's exactly the same as we will see at the social or at the economic level. Another thing which is interesting to me is that most of the issues that I'm going to talk about in this presentation have been dealt with extensively by writers, philosophers, or science fiction movies or other sources in the past. So if you recall the original Blade Runner from 1982, the idea of Blade Runner is that essentially human robots could be invented which were so realistic in terms of their external tissue, their biology, their reasoning, and so on and so forth, that to cushion the impact of this, they were given artificial memories or fake memories, because with these fake memories, they could understand that, yes, despite the fact that they were human replicants, you know, they were still valued, and therefore they could still be used to the fullest part of their potential. Let me just, Ioana, can you manage the waiting room? Ioana?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks. Okay. Another interesting quandary which comes out from this modern world that we're building is the idea of robots and how a robot can actually be productive and sophisticated enough at the human level that it can, on the one hand, coincide with humans with artificial intelligence, with a simulacrum of human intelligence, but at the same time not fully overtake humanity. And Isaac Asimov wrote about that in 1942. It was made into a fantastic movie with Will Smith in 2004. But you know, the very idea here is what happens if you are replicating a human biology in a cyborg. I mean, in a mix of digital data plus, you know, physical materials. And how can you convince that robot that if, you know, eventually it may have to make a choice between the typically irrational human behavior that we behave in all the time and that robot's original mission, basically. And again, this is a very deep philosophical debate. We're nowhere near finding a solution to this or an answer to this. But if we look at the existential problems confronting us, like climate change or you know, poverty or issues like this, we can see that these are really becoming burning issues. I mean, time is really running out on a number of fronts. Another movie you might recall came out in 2002, Minority Report, with the idea here was that data could be collected from the environment and from human decisions and human observable data, and that could be used to predict potential future crimes. And what I find absolutely fascinating is China is right now engineering a system which is not exactly something which is aimed at crime prevention, but which is a social credit system whereby individuals are given a social credit score based on decisions they make, and then based on the impact of those decisions. So everything from your personal credit rating, your police record, your driving record, fines you might have gotten in the past, also positive citations and things like that. There is a lot of external study on this area. I've listed some sources at the right of the screen. But again, this is something which, since that technology exists, and since we know that already the private sector is developing very similar credit scoring devices, right? And you can look, for instance, not just at private sector credit scoring, but you can even look at private sector demographic analysis, which was used to great effect in the 2016 Brexit referendum and the 2016 US presidential election, to micro-target advertising. And if you have any exposure to this world, you know that it is incredibly effective. And we were able to combine data from 200 to 300 different sources and use that data to define microsegments, to target the microsegments with messaging, and to literally, significantly influence behavior with a fairly high chance of success in terms of understanding what that person will do, whether it's a consumer, whether it's a voter, whether it's someone else. So the technology is there. Pandora's box has been fully opened, so to speak. We don't know how far the Chinese system is going to go, at least I don't. I'm only a passive observer of that system. I have some experience in some other predictive analytics where the degree of accuracy and the degree of utility you can get in terms of influencing that behavior is incredible and uncanny. And I don't know if many people saw this movie here. It came out in 2008, Ready Player One. And the idea is that, again, in a future society, the economic conditions have deteriorated to such an extent that we have mass numbers of unemployed people who are essentially in a permanent underclass. And, the main source of escape from reality that these people have is through a virtual reality game or a series of virtual reality games or environments. And again, this is not a new concept. There have been quite a number of other movies or books about this. But what I found most interesting about this movie is that the movie is all about the traditional success of the male and female protagonists, right? So we have a winner, basically, and it accepts the wider premise that we will have an underclass whose only escape is through virtual reality. It accepts that at face value. And I found this juxtaposition incredible. But again, if we drive through downtown Los Angeles and we see 55 or 75,000 homeless people, we've accepted that reality as well. And we're simply trying to avoid it in our day-to-day interactions. So what I want to do is look at a few tech strands. And again, I'm not going to cover these in any great depth. And there are a lot of other issues which go along here, but for a 1 hour discussion, I don't want to get into too great a detail, but I want to look at entertainment, and that means media plus gaming. I want to look at labor, and by that I'm combining also, human labor, robotics, and data. And I'd like to look very generally at medicine, and I'd like to describe some of the trends and developments which are emerging or have already been expressed. And I want to then try to discuss what that means for us coming into the future. Now, the sad thing, or what I'm confident of, what gives me a bit of confidence, but also what scares the hell out of me, I should say, is that none of this is my invention. All of this stuff exists. All of this stuff can be confirmed in the real world. All of the information you're about to see has been relatively standard practice, at least in laboratory environments for the past 5 years, and in many cases in the actual production environment, and in some cases in the actual, mainstream of human activity. So none of this is science fiction, but it's going to have very science fiction outcomes for us, I think, in a very short period of time. So this is, again, what, if you ask me what keeps me awake at night, it's a combination of factors like this and the fact that we simply do not have a unified solution for it, or a unified means of dealing with it. Let's start with entertainment. And again, I'm going to come out there with a thesis, and that thesis might sound a little bit strange or naive, I don't know, you decide, but I believe that by 2030, it will be difficult for us to differentiate between reality and the equivalent of an immersive gaming environment. So if you wake up one Saturday morning and you go out and you read a newspaper, say on the balcony or on your park bench or whatever, and you're doing the same thing in an immersive VR environment, it may well be that you have difficulty understanding what the objective reality is. The only difference that I'm confident of expressing is that what you see in that immersive environment is going to be better. First of all, it's going to be more comfortable. You will be able to fully control that environment in terms of most of the sensory feedback you're getting, not taste, but certainly a lot of touch, a lot of haptic interface will be engineered by that time. You won't be able to feel the wind on your face or anything like that, but you will be able to see incredible graphics on the screen in front of you, graphics which are in fact better than reality, or at least more richer than reality. You'll be able to fully imagine and select the environment that you want, and I think this is becoming more and more important to a larger and larger number of our fellow citizens who have in fact less control. They are disenfranchised, they are working or living in adverse physical conditions, and being able to have a virtual environment they control is going to be a benefit which they will actively seek. That leads then to two other issues. The first is that you'll be able to recreate yourself. So you'll be able to imagine yourself not as, the guy who has to wake up Monday to Friday and rush off to work or something like that, but you can recreate yourself in a different environment. You can be a Viking on a Viking ship. You can be someone on a space station. You can be someone driving, a supercar or something like that. And when we take all of these things together, it's going to lead to self-validation. In other words, we are engaging in behaviors which ultimately have a biological impact, but certainly a great psychological impact. And these validate the images that we have of ourselves. They give value to the choices we make and to the lifestyles that we feel we're leading, and to the way that we interact with reality and with data. And when we take this a little bit further, because in immersive reality, you're not on your own. You can choose to be on your own, but you can also do gaming through clans, you can do travel, you can do any number of different activities. I think we're going to, I'm confident that this is going to attract huge segments of the relatively affluent population, and it's going to be immensely more comfortable and more attractive than the real world. And again, I'm not making a value judgment on that. I'm saying that this is something which we believe has a very high chance of taking place. And in fact, we see it today. So we see it especially with younger men and women who are spending a lot of time on a gaming environment. And again, there's a lot of research on the subject. Entertainment now has limits in terms of the sensory impact and the dimensions that we're looking at. So right now we're looking at two-dimensional screens, admittedly with an amazing visual interface. But in terms of other senses, we're looking at more sophisticated headphones, we're looking at gaming mouses, we're looking at gaming chairs and things like that. As we move into the future, we're really going into that immersive virtual reality. And that means facial and voice recognition. so that you will not necessarily just be interacting by touch, but by voice and by facial expressions, by where your eyes are moving. By the way, that's a technology which is already heavily embedded in the F-35 fighter jets in the United States. We'll be looking also at haptic controls and feedback. In other words, patterns of gestures you will make, but also gestures. So for instance, you've probably seen these games where you pretend to be playing tennis or playing ping pong or throwing a football or whatever. All of that is gesture recognition. That all exists today. Okay, so you can play baseball today in a virtual reality environment, and you know, it's pretty damn near real. I mean, of course it's not real, we recognize that. But that experience of that online sport is getting more and more real. And by 2030, I think it's going to be incredibly tangible. And also we've got to take into account that the quality of the visual rendering is getting better and better every year. You can be in a Lord of the Rings style environment today, online or in VR, and it can be quite difficult to understand whether you're in a 3D rendering or whether you're in a real dungeon in some cases. So a lot of this is being driven by entertainment and the technology around entertainment. There's a lot of then accompanying research which focuses on the addiction that this produces. And again, there are just many, many sources of information on this. I'm not going to get into this in very great detail, but I've given you some of the, I would say, most interesting and most accessible studies or talks about it. One of them is here on Harvard University's, one of the graduate schools. I've called up a couple of other sources here from the Addiction Center and the American Addiction Centers on social media addiction and video game addiction. Again, I'm not doing this to condemn anything. My point is that this type of activity has a real biochemical reaction and engenders, in many cases, a real dependency in the human organism. And that is, of course, both biochemical and then it extends into, psychological, basically. So it's not just Facebook, right? It's not just harmless social media. There's a lot of other stuff which is running in the background and which is increasingly changing us. And if we think that Facebook has about 2 billion daily active users, if I remember my numbers correctly, we're not talking about insignificant numbers here. We're talking about mainstreaming these phenomena into human society. Okay. The thesis that we can predict is that the government or different governments are inevitably going to try to regulate this area. The UK government has already laid out its plan on regulating this. There have been some US Congress hearings. There have been, I think, some hearings in European Parliament. But the natural response of governments and families will be to attempt to regulate this. I don't believe it's going to succeed. I believe it's going to fail. I believe that the technology is simply already too embedded and it's too decentralized. So, it's not like we're regulating something like, pharmaceuticals, which need laboratories or production plants, and you can identify where those are and control them. In this environment, we're talking about technology and software. It's distributed globally. There are plenty of, unregulated servers. There's the dark web and so on and so forth. And so I think it's going to be practically impossible for us to come to terms with it. I also believe that as an adjunct to this, we talk a lot about the gamification of education and what the education sector can learn from the gaming, not so much the gaming industry, but in terms of how people react to gaming. And I believe that this is not the right question. I believe that we should be talking about the failure of education. And again, I'm not blaming education in any way, but I'm asking a couple of questions. Number one, are Our classical liberal education model that we're following was designed to educate citizens who could, first of all, engage in lifelong learning. Second of all, act as active citizens, evaluating things for themselves. And third of all, enable everyone to, to absorb information and knowledge and to express an opinion about it. And I'm wondering, in an age of instant gratification, which is what we see online today, and excuse me for saying this, but also immorality, can this classical education work? Now, what do I mean by immorality? I'm not talking about porn or anything like that. I'm talking about the fact that we live in an age where politicians can lie unchecked, where the greatest lies are often the most visible ones. And there is simply no way to provide a moral compass around that. And yet this moral compass is at the basis of education. How can we have, for instance, an honor system in education? How can we talk about not plagiarizing or not lying when we see this taking place, pretty much daily around us in the political environment and in a number of other environments? So we're going to be confronted by, I don't think education needs to learn from gaming. I think we need to understand, is education fit for purpose in the way that we used to see it? And how can we educate these future minds, given that the biology of these minds is changing? And it is simply maybe no longer suited to rote learning, to case studies, to long laboratory exercises, to reading hundreds and hundreds of books every week and trying to get the information you need to have an informed debate on it. This is how our education system works: higher, primary, and so on and so forth. And yet our brains are literally changing, and there seems to be no overlap between the two. Again, I don't want to get into a long debate about the educational system. I'm not blaming the educational system, but I can tell that there's a huge gap, and I see that gap when I have to recruit people who are age 30 or younger. And it is a very significant gap that we need to deal with. A long time ago, Karl Marx talked about religion being the opium of the masses. I literally think today that entertainment is the opium of the masses. And in that, I include social media. I include things like Netflix. I include things like gaming, because this industry and the technology that drives it is literally having an opiate style effect, I believe, on a lot of us. And it's not just, the fact that we get high on a Netflix series after dinner or whatever, and we shut ourselves off from the rest of the world. It's that our brain is literally changing with all of these, biochemical impacts that we've been discussing. So again, I see things really changing. I see this segment as really being at the forefront of a lot of things, and I see absolutely zero public initiatives on trying to understand the impact that it's going to have on everything from, how we take tests, to how we hire people, to how we expect people to learn in the workforce. There's a huge gap between the technology that's there and everything else. And again, by 2030, that's 9 years away. I really see this going in just one direction, and that direction is that this online world is becoming vastly more attractive than the offline world, than reality. The next area is labor, and I'm adding here robotics and data. And our thesis here is a little bit even more drastic, but we believe that by 2030, roughly 50% of the professions that we see today in industrialized economies, so I'm not talking about subsistence rural economies, but the industrialized urban economies that we tend to live in, I believe that these professions will have been replaced by a mix of robots and software, and driven by AI. And I believe that this impact is going to be so dramatic that it is literally going to impact everything from political parties and perceptions of the future to, of course, the macroeconomy and the public economy, to how committed we feel to the idea of a country, of a common country, a common polity. Now, in many cases, the technology that we're going to look at here already exists, but it's not regulated. And as humans, we're not prepared to accept it in practice. By 2040, however, I believe that we're going to be at the level where we will have accepted this, even in many advanced professions. So let me give you an example. Let's say you go into the hospital and you're given a choice, do you want a human surgeon or a robot surgeon? By 2030, I think we're going to choose the human surgeon. By 2040, I'm pretty confident we're going to choose the robot. It's that drastic, basically. So let's look at some of these robots and the automation and the impact it's having. Well, the large majority of robots today are robots that serve things like this Roomba, which I love. It's an automated route planning, self-moving vacuum cleaner. And you can press the button, you can allow it to either explore by itself, or you can put in its own route, and that thing will just vacuum your floor all day. And that's great. We talk about cobots, which are, robots which work with humans. And if you look at most industrial and especially high capitalization industrial lines today, whether that's automotive production or chip fabrication or whatever, we see that there's a clear melding of man and machine, but where robots are increasingly doing the heavy lifting. And of course, conversely, we see that a $2 billion or $5 billion fabrication plant may only have about 100 people working on the production lines. And that is a 24-hour, 365-day production process with tolerances and output far finer than anything we can do, pure human labor can do. So this one category of robots I think is fairly clear. I think we've all accepted them. If you've lived in the States, you've seen just how much further tools like Alexa or Siri really are in terms of home automation. You've probably all seen images of Amazon delivering something by drone, or the idea of a driverless car. But we all tend to see this type of automation as something beneficial, as something at least non-harmless, even something sexy or interesting or useful. There's also robots that dance, and I'm being facetious here, but there's a fantastic clip from Boston Dynamics, which illustrates 3 of its robots in some of the most complex anthropomorphic movements you can expect. I encourage all of you to check out that link and watch it. I'm not going to show it here, but it really shows you how far things have gone. And if you look at the dog, there's a little 4-legged robot dancing. The complexity of its movements are easily surpass the complexity of some of the most highly trained human dancers on the planet. So, there are incredible advances that are being made at that level. Another thing which I found very funny occurred last year during COVID. Japan is a fanatical baseball country. Baseball stadiums were closed. The games were still being played. To keep the players company, they put an array of robots in the stands who were dancing and clapping and everything else. And again, I encourage you to look at that. If you look at the humanoid robot and you look at how its fingers move, and you look at the tangibility of its expressions and its ability to lift things or move things, you understand very quickly that that robot could easily be deployed in a hospital, say as a nurse or a nurse's assistant. It can easily be deployed to look after old people. It can easily be deployed maybe in some office environments to move things around or safeguard materials or do things like that. So again, the technology is there. We're not really adapting it so much in countries like Greece or Cyprus. There are other countries where it's really being adapted in various ways. I don't know if you have been to France in the last 10 years and to a McDonald's in France, but France is a very high tax environment, and it is a constant push to try to determine new ways to save labor. And so to make a long story short, if you've been in Paris, you've seen, for instance, if you go into a McDonald's or a Burger King, you know that today you do most of your ordering on a large screen, right? And you put in the order and then you wait, and you can either pick up your order or you can pay for it, and so on and so forth. I believe that came to Cyprus a few years ago. What's interesting is that the number of experiments companies like McDonald's are doing are far, far higher than just the order taking process. There are now labs which are increasingly dedicated to fully automating food processing. So McDonald's is looking at components like robot fryers and things like that. Other companies are looking at industrial ovens, which can, and robot controlled industrial ovens, which can say, produce pizzas on the fly. But again, if we look at our economy today, precisely this area is some of the lowest paying jobs on the planet, which have some of the worst working conditions, but at least they are jobs and at least there's food involved with the jobs, even though these are, minimum wage jobs. Imagine what's going to happen 10 years from now if half of those jobs are replaced, or at one point 75% of those jobs will be replaced. We're looking at something which is going to be a net gain to some extent for the producer, for the vendor, but for human society, I mean, if we don't find some alternative for these professions, we are heading for, I think, a very negative outcome, basically. We're heading for an even more disenfranchised underclass that lives in poverty. And we're living, we're engineering a system where something like 50% of our existing labor today can no longer really be gainfully employed unless there's some balancing cost, like some subsidy or something else. So again, there's stuff like this. There's stuff like delivery robots. You might have seen Nura. Amazon.com is also experimenting with equivalent driverless cars. These are not the full-size passenger cars. These are vehicles just for delivery. And the idea being that, each of those segments in the vehicle is oriented towards a specific family or a specific order. As I said before, you've probably seen the Amazon drone advertisements. You might have seen that the Royal Mail did its first trial late last year in Scotland with drone delivered mail. And there have been already millions of miles driven by driverless cars. There are increasingly countries that are starting to license these. And finally, we've got robots that kill. And, in many respects, the future of warfare is the future of robotics. We've seen, for instance, over the past 10 years and more, we've seen how drones have been used in counterinsurgency operations in Afghanistan or Syria or Yemen. And of course, the collateral damage is just heartbreaking, because when you're looking at a target from 10,000 meters up, it looks like one thing. And then when you understand that after you've bombed something like a wedding party or a school or something like that, you realize that you haven't bombed a military target, you've bombed a civilian target. But there is a huge amount of R&D going into Miltech robots. These are everything from this boat here, which you can see, which is essentially an anti-submarine warfare drone. There are aerial drones, there are underwater drones, there are drone swarms. And for those of you who paid attention to the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh over last summer, you can see that our neighbor, Turkey, is one of the leaders in this area right now in drone warfare. So again, we have, robotics for good, robotics for bad. It's not something that we here in Cyprus are really able to influence. But we just need to understand that the development here is really taking place at a very rapid rate. And as far as I can see, it's an irreversible rate. I haven't seen any country or organization saying, for the sake of better employment or for the sake of humanity and warfare, we have to stop research and development in drones or anything else. So again, when we then combine this with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on and so forth, we are really entering a brave new world, basically. And I've seen different scenarios, primarily from DARPA in the United States, which posits two opposing forces, and using robots and using drone technology and AI. And the whole idea today is that technology is getting so fast and so complex that it is faster than human reactions can actually deal with. So part of the decision making in AI, in some of the new battleships that are coming out, or some of the new airframes that are out there, is when does the AI of that ship or that airframe take over and respond on behalf of the pilot or the crew who cannot react fast enough. And again, if we think about what this means that in the future wars might be over in a single afternoon, basically. And we may not actually know they're over until we have confirmation that our drone force has been destroyed to the last unit, or our opponent's drone force has been destroyed to the last unit. So again, this technology is here now. We saw what Turkey did last summer, and Turkey is by no means, a great power. It might have aspirations to become a great power, but it is not a power like China or the United States, where this technology is far more advanced, and it's being developed at a very, very rapid rate, basically. So again, the technology is there. Now, what I believe is going to happen by 2030. By 2030, I think that most agri-food value chain professions will have been replaced by a mix of IoT, Internet of Things, sensoring, robots, and big data. And this includes all the way from primary agriculture all the way up to food service. I believe that 90% of the lower value-added work that accountants, lawyers, consultants, architects, developers, that what we're doing, me as well, the work that we're doing today will have been replaced. So I look at the work my accountant does and the work I have to do for my accountant, all of that is going to be replaced by artificial intelligence. And I don't know what all of these people will be doing, but I hope they're going to find something valuable to do. And I believe that 50% of the lower value work in careers such as nursing, elderly care, transport, or military will have been replaced. That's just by 2030, that's 9 years away. Again, this stuff exists today, we're simply not deploying it. By 2040, I think that combination of robotics and AI is going to take over advanced professions. And again, we can even think of examples like, you take the legal system. There's no reason in the world why resolving a legal case in Cyprus or Greece takes 8 years. There is AI today based on database queries, which can resolve a case in 5 minutes and resolve a case with a higher degree of accuracy as measured in retrospect than by human lawyers. So imagine if in the future, you go and you have a legal case, you have a simple case like a divorce case. I believe you're going to literally hit a button on your computer screen and it's going to give you a decision in 30 seconds. If you have a more complex case, you're probably going to be hitting that button. You'll have the response and then you might appeal. And then there's going to be a human judge or jury involved, and probably you're going to have to pay extra for that. Again, this technology exists today. We're not talking about science fiction. It's there. It's it's under development right now. I believe that most elderly care, nursing, and medical functions will be covered by personal robotics, including medical operations. And as I gave the example before, I think you're going to walk into a hospital and you're going to be quite happy to have one of these medical robots doing, say, your appendicitis operation. I just think that it's going to get so mainstreamed and you will feel so secure with it because it will have been mainstreamed. So again, these things are, these changes are going to have an existential impact on our society. And certainly I don't see anyone really preparing us or anyone really trying to understand, what's our plan A, what's our plan B for something like this. Let me go very quickly through health, and then do some quick conclusions and open it up for questions. So our thesis for health is that by maybe longer, maybe by 2040 or maybe by 2050, I believe that most humans will have 130 to 150 year lifespan, just as a standard model. You know, right now we're roughly at about 80, 83 years, somewhere there. But as we improve our health technology, we're going to improve the lifespan, at least for the people who can afford it. Part of this involves self-selecting positive genetic traits, which means that, you know, if you go into a hospital and you're with your wife or your husband or whatever other options are going to exist, you will actually be able to choose certain genetic traits of your offspring, including probably the gender, although that might be too big, but certain other genetic traits will certainly be choosable. You will also be able, of course, to choose genetic diseases. We'll be able to preventatively treat diseases based on a statistical analysis of DNA through gene mapping. We should also be able to develop super immune cells, so super cells which can be developed, injected into you, and will provide you with future coverage against certain cancers or other illnesses. It goes without saying that continual health monitoring will be taking place using wearables and implants. Again, a lot of that exists now. And that replacement body parts and organ systems can either be grown or fabricated. And again, a lot of this is being done now. It's not exactly something revolutionary. Okay, just very quickly, some of the gene therapeutical options are here. And what's interesting, of course, is that if we look at the COVID vaccine right now, that is a very relevant, I would say, example of a genetic therapy. And what's interesting is that as we move forward, we're looking at genetically personalized therapies. So we're not looking at making one gene therapy for all of the types, say, of liver cancer in the world, but we might only be looking, you know, at therapies for a much smaller group of patients who exhibit very specific genetic markers or conditions. We'll be able to do preventive treatments, just like you do preventive maintenance on a production line. And we'll be able to genetically engineer immune cells and deploy them. Again, all of this is stuff that's under development now. None of this is really new. What's interesting as well is that we are going to move, I mean, we're already hitting up against the boundaries of regulatory limits. And it's not sure how that's going to be resolved in the future, but right now we have far greater technology available than we're actually permitted to use. And we will also then be moving from treating life-threatening conditions to optional treatments. And that means, again, you'll be able to pick and choose certain aspects of your biology or your children's biology and change it. You might have heard a while back of a Chinese scientist who claimed to have created the first gene-edited babies. This came and went. I personally haven't tracked to see if it's something that actually took place or not. But again, what is incredible for me is that this is not considered science fiction. It's simply something at the limit of what we're prepared to accept as a technology, basically. And I think we can all assume that, you know, gene-edited babies at one point are going to become the norm. We've certainly taken every other step in that direction with many parallel types of therapies or breakthroughs. We'll be moving from wearables to implants. So right now you might be wearing an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or whatever. In the future, you're going to have implants. They might include dosimeters, which enable dosages to be automatically regulated. They might include nanomolecules. Any kind of equipment which is implanted, anything from, say, a pacemaker to a stent or anything like that, will become smart or smarter, allowing for onboard measurements. And the future is increasingly also the computer-brain interface. Right now, a lot of work is going into that area for repairing damaged brains. In the future, we are also heading towards just improving the speed and the effectiveness of computer-brain interaction. You might want to look up a company called BRAINGATE. It's not a company, it's more of a foundation, and they're doing a lot of cutting-edge research into computer-brain interaction. And Elon Musk, who is obviously very popular with Tesla, SpaceX, and others, he is invested in a company called Neuralink. And Neuralink is a private organization, a startup, which is researching specifically on brain-computer interaction. And you might have seen, I believe last year, there was a blurb in the media that pigs had been implanted with computer chips in their brains, and they were being used in various experiments. Again, the technology is there, it's being used. There is remarkably little regulatory oversight, and there's even less social reaction to some of these things which are going on, which means that, you know, when Pandora's box finally opens, don't be outraged, because again, as a citizen and as a consumer, the information is there. It's really up to us, you know, if we're going to react to it or not, and how. So this brings us kind of to the end, into these two conflicting visions. On the one hand, we have a utopia. On the other hand, like everything human, I think we have a dystopia. Now, what's the utopia? I think the utopia is pretty clear. We can make huge expansions to the human lifespan. Again, right now, our average life expectancy has been rising fairly well after World War II. With the changes that are coming, we will be able to make paradigm steps or step changes to the length of the human life. This will be very positive for some people. This might be very negative for other people. And certainly we're going to have to figure out how to pay for all of this as a society. We should be able to eradicate a lot of diseases which we might be able to prevent in the laboratory by 2030, by 2040. We should be able to actually start doing that in practice as a routine. And again, I think this is very positive. No one wants to have cancer, right? No one wants any of these diseases that our biological organisms have saddled us with. We can imagine engineering new food crops. We can imagine, you know, more advanced technology, certainly the most advanced ever that we've had in our human existence. In theory, we could use robots to take care of our most poor and vulnerable. I think the average cost of robots like that is rapidly going to fall till we're looking probably at about $6,500, maybe $5,000 per unit. That means it's going to be a no-brainer to have, you know, every family with an elderly parent or something like that will have a robot which will accompany them 24/7, 365 days a year, and actually be able to interact with them, play games with them, fetch things, maybe cook things, monitor their health, relay warnings and alerts, and so on and so forth. And again, I think this is something which, you know, can have a huge benefit for us. We should be able to drive certain types of societal advances, things like maybe cleaning up parts of our planet, or health and safety, or things like that. We can end a lot of the drudge of human labor. I think, you know, for people who are knowledge workers, like I believe most of the people on this presentation right now, human labor can actually be quite satisfying. I mean, I know I love my job and I love what I do, but for a lot of people, it's a real drudge, and especially people working in manual professions at the bottom of the minimum wage scale. This is not a, you know, particularly pleasant existence, and I think that's also one of the reasons we have so many illegal workers and migrant workers in so many professions. And of course, we could save our environment and our planet. Now, these are all possibilities. These are all policy priorities. They will need funding. They will need a social acceptance and a prioritization, but they are all possible today. I mean, these things are in our grasp. We've proved that these technologies exist either in a laboratory or in a limited environment. It's simply a question of mainstreaming them. There will also, of course, be negative impacts, and there's going to be a lot of challenges along the way, and hence the dystopia. And the utopia is something like a vision from Star Trek, driverless cars, shuttles, policies made by informed decisions, and so on and so forth. The problem is we tend to live in an Earth which is, and a human society where rather than looking at utopia, we're very often looking at dystopia. And this is sad given the fact that this is 2021 and we have all of the world's knowledge at our fingertips. Unfortunately, in so many respects, we're still unable to organize our basic operations as a human polity and as a human society. So what are some of the problems? Well, the problems are that technological gains are not spread uniformly across the planet or across any single country. In fact, the opposite tends to be true. The gains that we see right now are concentrated at the top in the hands of a relatively small number of billionaire innovators and companies. And these companies tend to be stronger, in fact, than most countries where they are housed. And society has become increasingly unequal. Now, you would think that in an era of peace, we should be able to have, viable solutions for this. What is amazing is that we don't. We're not able to self-organize ourselves to handle things like inequality. So if you look at the poverty rate in Greece or Cyprus, or you look at the number of people at risk of poverty as defined by Eurostat, or you look at poverty and homelessness in countries like the United States or the United Kingdom or France, the numbers are truly abysmal compared to where we are as a whole. Why dystopia? Because also, as I said, roughly 50% of employment is going to be replaced, and I don't see that the jobs will be supplemented by something else. And this is occurring against a backdrop of a rising population. We're going to add roughly 2 billion people to 2050. That's 2 billion in 30 years. That's a massive number. And economists keep telling us, yes, but it's not a lump of labor. Other things will be found. Well, again, there's a lot of evidence today which disproves that. And we see it when we look at rural poverty, say in the United States, or we look at urban poverty in the United States. When we look at the number of people who are working at minimum wage or who are at risk of social exclusion. And these are hard facts, and these facts don't seem to change over time, except to get worse. It's a dystopia because our governments are unable to mediate between economic growth and innovation on the one hand and inequality and poverty on the other. They can't regulate most financial sectors today. And frankly, there's no real sign that they're aware of what the future is bringing. Speaking for myself, I haven't seen many long-term forecasts on the impact of technology and society for these issues that we've discussed. And yet these issues, I think, are already prevalent in most of the countries that we're dealing with today. It's an aphorism, the rich will grow not only richer, but because precisely they will be able to afford the first gene therapies, it's the rich who will have a different definition of what it means to be human. Again, up until today, the process of human reproduction is a naturally occurring biological process. In a genetically engineered future, it won't be, or it doesn't have to be. We will have a choice on what to do and what to accept. And the more we go into the future, the more mainstreamed it's going to be to say, yes, of course, I want to eliminate some potentially harmful genes. But yes, I also want them to maybe, improve some of the actual mental or physical performance of my babies, of my kids. And I think this is really inevitable. So we're really looking at a kind of a Blade Runner future, and this is from the recent Blade Runner movie here. If you go back and you look at the original Harrison Ford pick back in, when was it? It's quite incredible how how that vision of a society picked up very interestingly where we are right now in many respects. And so I have some questions. I don't have answers, or if I have answers, they're answers for me. They're not relevant to everyone. But I have a lot of questions which I think deserve to be asked, and maybe we can reflect on these now together. I'll just go through them and then I'll open up the room for debate. First of all, we said that China is looking at a national social credit system, which includes continual monitoring of individual activity. It is simultaneously a means of control and reward. Other governments have outsourced credit scoring to the private sector. Is this something we want to do? And where would it end? What would the, what limits would we place on, say, privacy versus social credit score? Another question is that we have this macro consensus that we need low taxes and a relatively low government to attract investment. But since 1980, right, the year Reagan took power, countries as diverse as the United States, Greece, or Cyprus have seen steadily rising debt and deficits, as well as stable or variable poverty levels. Do we think government is fit for purpose today, given the outcomes that it has? And what would you need to make government fit for purpose by 2030 or by 2040? How do we make decisions, for example, in government? Another point, you've probably all heard of Universal Basic Income, UBI, which is the idea that irrespective of someone's financial situation, they would receive an income support from the state, and they can use this at their choice, basically. And a lot of people are saying UBI is the solution to tech-driven unemployment. Can this be afforded? Can a society afford to have 30 to 50% of its population on similar schemes? That is I realistically see these numbers emerging, especially in a lot of urban industrial democracies. Does anyone really believe that the current and future tech markets constitute examples of functioning competition? How does one deal with tech monopolies? I think this is a crucial question we have today because, again, the responsibility of a government is to regulate an economic sector for the benefit of all participants in that sector. And it's pretty clear that the monopolistic power held by Facebook, Google, and several others is far beyond what we've seen. And as we also saw with Microsoft 10 years ago or more, it's pretty much impossible to break up these oligopolies or monopolies. So how is this concentration of power going to affect competition and innovation in the future? I think it's a key question we have to face. Our macro systems, and especially our pension systems, have been engineered for 8 to 10 working people to every retiree and a life expectancy below 70 years. Right now, guys, and I can give you numbers on this, we have roughly 2 actively employed workers for every retiree. We have an average life expectancy which is starting to approach 90 in many countries, and we have an employment rate at only 50% of the population. This is a recipe for bankruptcy. This is why governments are incurring debt and deficit all over the world, but particularly in the countries that we're happening to be living in today, Greece, Cyprus, Western Europe. And the system is not sustainable because on the one hand, it can't even afford pensions, or at least living wage pensions, for the majority of its retirees. And of course, for anyone who's employed or any company that has to employ people, it's getting more and more expensive to do so. So, mathematically, we're really heading towards a fiscal disaster in a lot of countries. Second point here on this slide, democracy is very vulnerable to fake news and unscrupulous politicians. Politics is probably the only profession where one can openly lie without consequences. At which point do we think the democratic franchise must be restricted to pre-qualified voters? if we're not going to choose such a solution or any other solution, how else can we prevent the disasters our current democratic cycles have been bringing? You know, I lived very intensely through the Greek financial crisis from 2009 until today. And, you know, I thought, okay, Greece is the outlier. In the meantime, you know, Theresa May and Boris Johnson and Donald Trump were elected, and Tsipras was elected, and a lot of other, you know, failures have taken place in the democratic cycle. So I don't think it's an outlier anymore. I think it's becoming, you know, prevalent, at least in some countries. And if we're not able to change this, then we are literally jumping off a cliff by allowing a fundamentally damaged system as it's practiced today to continue operations. What happens if wars are no longer fought by humans? Who wins? And how does the rest of the world know it? How do you accept the defeat? What happens if more and more rich families genetically engineer their children? And what happens if more and more rich families live superhumanly long lives? I think these are just some questions which come about from this presentation and what we see happening. And it's something which I think, you know, should be discussed, and in particular by society and by the, you know, governments in the public sector. And I kind of see that it's not. So I'd be very interested to hear your opinions or any other questions or discussions you might have.
Thank you, Philip. Very nice, very interesting. Ajay, is it right?
Yes. Hi, Philippe.
Hi, Ajay.
Hello from Oslo. As if the pandemic wasn't bad enough, now I won't sleep for the next 30 days. You've scared the daylights out of us. And this is a compliment. I just did a project in AI using GPT-3. And they have, what, about 400 billion tokens, bytes of data that it has crawled. And it was just fascinating to ask it questions and the accuracy with which it writes original text. Yeah. What I wanted to say was that you are still better. Yeah. The analysis and review that you have given, it's like 1 year of Economist Technology Review or the MIT Technology Review. And you've posed some very interesting ethical questions. And I just wrote a small comment that some trials of AI in law in Estonia, in California, they're not only quicker and they are not only fair and they are not only judicious, but they're also more ethical. Mm-hmm. So I think the first challenge is for the unethical societies. I won't name names, I won't name countries. What happens when this digital divide, and two things that you did not mention, and I think they're very important, is that will just increase the digital divide by light years. Yeah. That is, in 10 years, quantum computing becomes real. Yeah. And in about 10 to 12 years, nuclear fusion reactors come online. Briefcase-sized nuclear fusion reactors. So 1,000 suns shining, producing energy on the planet Earth. What happens 10, 15 years from now to countries that are already 30 years behind in the digital race, in efficiency, in ethics? And do we then see kind of a new era of colonization as we saw 500 years ago, where an industrialized West and corporations created like the East India Company financed expeditions to South America and Asia, and they basically colonized the whole planet? Will it be that the big tech and the big powerful corporations or nations will again colonize stupid and non-competitive societies? Is that what we are going to see? Because it seems it's almost inevitable, isn't it?
Very good question. Very good question. I think one thing which is definitely going to happen is there's going to be there will be multiple centers of gravity, and I believe some of the smaller countries are going to fall into that orbit of some of these, you know, some of these emerging centers, either voluntarily, perhaps involuntarily. We will definitely see, you know, more aggressive, or at least more overt power grabs, and you know, that can express itself, you know, country to country, or possibly enterprise to enterprise, or technology to technology, for sure. And I think, you know, all of this is also occurring at the same time as climate change, according to current trends, is really becoming irreversible. I mean, if we don't get our emissions down significantly by 2032 or 2034, we're kind of on a one-way path to a very violent surface, you know, climate on this earth. So, you know, if you're a country like, I don't know, Tonga or something like that, is there any reason you wouldn't accept a buyout offer from China? But yeah, I mean, the more the technology becomes more volatile in terms of its impact, the more society will become more volatile as a result. I think one leads the other, basically. And if I look at, again, I love Cyprus, I love Greece, but we are, in many respects, we're not really at the epicenter of a lot of this technological development. And as a result, we're kind of getting dragged along with it. We're several years behind in many respects. And in some areas, it's amazing to me. Like, I mean, in Greece, you see today the impact of great power politics. You see that China Costco has taken over the port of Piraeus and has done an amazing job. I mean, sorry, but from the productivity and efficiency viewpoint, they have done marvels in the Greek public sector. You see America trying to block certain pipelines in Greece and in Europe, and then favoring other pipelines. So I mean, this is all there. What you're saying is spot on, because we see it. It's you know, energy and great power politics are alive and well today.
Will we get to choose who colonizes us? Will beg the Brits to come back, you think?
I think what we all have to do is have as many solutions for ourselves individually as we can. I've kind of given up trying to find solutions for a lot of nation states.
We have another raised hand from Alex. Alex, do you hear us?
Yes, I'm here. You hear me okay as well?
Yes.
Yep. Brilliant. Thank you very much for the presentation. You know, I thought it was a lot of very, very interesting topics raised, and you know, there's so much there to discuss. But I think one of the things that you know, you mentioned this kind of theme of robotics and automation replacing human labor, which, you know, for many things we can I think mostly agree it's a good thing. You know, maybe universal basic income is a way of financing it. Maybe taxing robots is a way of financing the universal basic income. My question is, you know, first of all, you know, do you agree with the notion that we will need something like universal basic income to kind of supplement the financing of our economies? And, you know, a kind of a connected question is, you know, what kind of work do you think will not be replaced, or maybe cannot be replaced by automation or by robotics?
Great question. Great question. So first of all, yeah, I think UBI is going to have to be implemented to some extent. What is frightening for me is when you look at the amount of money European countries spend on poverty alleviation, it is very, very high, and yet you will not see many structural changes in the number of people who are at risk of social exclusion. In fact, that number seems to be rising, and again, irrespective of COVID, not taking COVID into account, it seems to be rising. Of course, part of that is due to this boom in property prices, what you see across Europe. you know, there are a number of reasons for that. But to answer the first question, yeah, definitely we're going to need UBI, and we're going to need to find a way to make it smart expenditure rather than, you know, blanket or untargeted expenditure. And I'm not too clear about how that can be done, but I know that if we follow our current system, our countries are going to go bankrupt very, very soon. And again, I can send you or point you to some data to that effect. Now, the question on which jobs cannot be replaced. Before I answer that, I want to look at this from the viewpoint of the average citizen. I mean, I'm talking about changes which are coming up in anywhere from 9 to 20 years. This is not a long time from now. I mean, we are, you know, 10 years is really not a long time from where we are today. And I think in a country like Greece, Cyprus, to some extent France, Germany, I see that there's definitely going to be an opportunity to re-ruralize. So the story of our industrial democracy since World War II is we've had this tremendous influx from rural areas, which are now depopulated and empty, into urban areas, which is where the jobs were and where we also went from an industrial economy to a primarily service-driven economy. One of the opportunities we have for people who cannot adjust to the tech world, and as Ajay said, for people who are hit by the digital divide, which is very real, I think we have a lot of opportunities in re-ruralization. So pay people to go back to the countryside. I know this sounds a little bit simplistic, but you know, there's a lot of opportunities, or at least there are easier opportunities, certainly for older people or people who are not going to be able to have the cutting edge skills necessary to succeed in the digital economy. Now, let me answer that question. What are the jobs that are you know, going to be prevalent in the digital economy? To a large extent, they're going to be what we see today. So today, who are the winners in the digital economy? It's founders of breakthrough companies that can get high funding and establish a high market share. So we're looking at, you know, multinationals like Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and so on and so forth. It is smaller, nimbler, agile companies that either work around the same ecosystem, possibly compete with them, possibly, you know, work in other areas, but they follow the same approach, basically. So we're looking at, you know, heavy innovation, basically. And there are, in fact, a lot of, you know, a country like Germany has a lot of companies in this space which are not purely digital companies, but which bridge that gap between manufacturing and automation. And I think that's, you know, if we look at countries like Italy, France, Germany, that's the future of a lot of these Mittelstand type producers. We have in any society, we're going to have professions which are then creative at the individual level. You know, these might be authors, actors, musicians, whatever. I mean, you know, people who are going to work creatively and will definitely have to master, you know, that mix of digital performance and, you know, physical performance or in-person performance. Certainly, food or beverage is going to continue. You know, it's something that every human wants, the social interaction in the F&B and tourism sector. So, I mean, we're going to see a lot of these professions continuing, but we're going to start seeing less and less options for the low-skilled professions. So, you know, waiters, dishwashers, cleaners, people who are just doing a repetitive task, which could eventually be done cheaper or better by a machine, are definitely going to be at risk. People who are doing a low-tech task, like for instance, if you go into an accounting office and you realize that 90% of effort in an accounting office is dealing with managing expenditure, in other words, recording it by category and what the VAT is, all of that is going to be eliminated. There's really no longer any reason for it. It'll be done by software. So whoever's going to keep their job or keep their profession, it's going to be someone who can produce value and, you know, on the one hand over time, but on the other hand, tangibly today. Okay, and that value might be, for instance, an authentic experience in a rural hotel. It might be cooking up a meal. It might be a great musical performance. It might be writing a great piece of software code or something like that. But the idea of that value has to become embedded. And what we have today is we don't have value anymore in Europe. We have bureaucracy. We have vast amounts of human labor oriented towards bureaucratic processes, which are not leading to really any outcome, but which are theoretically there to prove you compliant with some type of standard, basically. Now, as long as we focus on that, we're going to fail. Okay, I mean, that's just going to cost more and more. It's going to slow everything else down. It's going to lead to higher taxes and higher interference in how the economy is going. So it's a long-winded answer, but I think if I tell my kids, what should they study, or what should they master in, or what profession should they go for, I don't really have an answer, except that I know that they're going to have to outperform for the rest of their lives. They cannot be complacent any longer. They cannot say that, I'm going to get a degree in 2022 and I'm not going to have to study again for the rest of my life. That is not going to happen, right? You're going to have to continually adapt, continually focus on where the value is, and you'll have to continually be in the struggle, the idea that there's a struggle that someone else can always do it better or more efficiently. And this is, it's not easy to accept, I think. I think in a society like Greece or Cyprus, unfortunately, we want to do what's best for our kids, and that means an easy life. But I think life is no longer easy.
Yeah, I think that's a very good answer. I think I pretty much agree with everything you said there. So yeah, not an easy life, but a life full of learning seems to be on the cards for us.
And challenges. You have to prove yourself. I mean, you just that's not going to stop. It's very interesting when you look at the banking sector in Greece or Cyprus. The banking sector was state-controlled roughly until the mid-1980s. And then primarily because of European Union rules in Greece, it was opened up to private investment. And so there was this explosion of banking branches and employment. And there was a parallel explosion in credit availability in Greece. And pretty soon there were banks on every single corner of the country. And a branch manager would be getting a salary like, 5,000 euro or something like that. And again, credit expansion was just phenomenal. You fast forward today and you see that, there's a huge merger process underway in the banking sector. Average salaries have fallen from about 5,000 to maybe 2,500, 3,000 for a branch manager. I mean, for the person leading the branch. And today, everything can be done online. So the idea that we can have an easy job in a bank, I think that's over, and it will be over even sooner if there weren't such a big union presence in that workforce, in that segment.
Any other questions?
Hi there. Yeah, sorry, it's Alex here. I have a lot of questions, but I don't want to hog the I don't want to hog all the attention. So if there's anybody else that has any questions, please let them go ahead of me.
We don't have any other questions.
Okay, maybe
You
maybe
can go
we can do
ahead.
this. Okay, yeah, Philip. I mean, you touched on a really interesting point of everything is going kind of digital, virtualized, and as the technology is there, becomes more and more lifelike and realistic. I mean, what impacts do you see on industries outside of technology, right? So I think the first thing that kind of suddenly jumps into my mind is something like travel and leisure. which of those is going to be better or worse in digital? I mean, I can imagine, a beach probably better in person, but if you go and visit something like the Acropolis, maybe that one is better in a digital world where you can eliminate all of the other people there, but you can also maybe bring it to life with bringing it back to all of its glory, or something like that. How do you see that kind of balancing out?
Yeah, I don't mean that we're going to be like, when I say that we want to live online, I mean like our daily kind of routine, our daily life, the daily delivery of services and value that we expect. I mean, if you order food online, you're not going to get an electronic hamburger, right? You're going to get a McDonald's hamburger. It's just going to be ordered online, delivered by someone. I don't know, maybe some poor delivery guy now, maybe in the future a robot or a drone or something like that. Travel, I think, is definitely going to be, a fundamental human activity. It's going to increase in the future. It's something that everyone wants, whether you are an older consumer or a younger consumer. We have this trend towards more and more trips, more leisure activities, and so on and so forth. Where digital is going to come in to play, it's the marketing, the quality review, things which before were in a way non-transparent. Now they are fully transparent. So, for example, again, I'll just take an example from Greece, which is, maybe it's not the right example, but it's an interesting example. During successive governments, the government gave EU subsidies to small hoteliers to build a hotel. So in contrast with a lot of other economies where larger means of capital really control the industry, Greece is a case study in how people with no education, no background in tourism were able to build like 20 or 30 room hotels and develop a tourist product around something like a beach, but also around the culture around that, their town, the cuisine, and so on and so forth. And if you fast forward today, something like typically 90% of all of their bookings are either coming from online travel agents like Booking.com or Expedia, or from tour operators. But in both cases, that is a digital sales channel. So you have these tiny people these tiny families who the fathers might have been shepherds or, farmers or whatever. They had a piece of land, they built a hotel, their children were educated, they learned English, they entered the sector, and they can hold on because it's a family enterprise, it's scaled to their needs, and there's a global digital pipeline which brings them tourists. And, I think this is one of the areas where we can still combine relatively low productivity traditional tourism and catering with ultra high competitive and ultra, digital travel marketing and travel experience management. And again, for me, this is just really, really interesting. And it gives me hope that if people do decide to re-ruralize, or if they do decide to say, okay, look, I can't be a banker anymore, and I don't want to be a waiter, maybe I can go back to my home village or to whatever and, set something up there, basically. Maybe I can have some entrepreneurial opportunity, which combined with an existing digital pipeline is going to, give me something to do for the next 20 years. So tourism, I think, is a good example of it's not just a global marketplace which is growing, it is digitally dominated, and the transport access is dominated by very high capital intensive structures, but where small capital intensive structures can actually participate in it very, very effectively. So this type of kind of like a hybrid model, this gives me a lot of hope, basically. This might be some of the solution for that huge number of people who's going to find themselves out of a job because they've been outcompeted by a piece of software or out-engineered.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly, for sure. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the film references as well. They were very cool.
Has anyone been affected now? I mean, does anyone see now that they are like their own company, their own professional activities being really disrupted by technology?
Yeah, the audience is mostly made from students.
Okay. But I mean, in the university sector, the disruption caused by EdTech is massive today. I mean,
It is mostly massive now from the pandemic,
yeah.
because we have to use technology.
Yeah. Can I ask you a loaded question?
Yes.
If you didn't have a state certified degree, how successful would the average university be?
Even we haven't had that.
If you didn't have the right, and if the labor force weren't dominated by state sanctioned university degrees, how successful would universities be today?
It is still a successful business.
Do you think?
I think University of Cyprus, it's a different business.
I mean, generally. Like I look at the United States, right, where the average bachelor's now, it's a 4-year program and it's over 60,000 a year. I mean, that for me is a business model which is doomed for extinction. It's not, there's just no way that can continue the way things are happening now, unless the number of places shrinks.
It will shrink eventually, but like the Cyprus universities that they are not governmental, they have a different target market.
Yeah.
For the time being. They are selling something to people that they cannot get something else. But the state university, I don't know. Panos, do you know?
It's affecting everybody, and COVID has accelerated this. So, for example, University of Cyprus was not allowed to offer online courses. Online courses were the monopoly of the Open University of Cyprus.
Really?
And now, yes, and now we were able to go to the government and say, do you now see how stupid this is? And they said, yes.
Amazing.
I mean, we are not going to push for that. You are now free to offer online programs if you want.
Okay.
And not because of COVID, because COVID opened our eyes basically to the futility of trying to micromanage the way that courses are offered. Not only by any school in Cyprus.
But I mean, I would imagine that universities are going to face huge disruption going into the future. I mean, the good ones will master it.
And there are also huge opportunities. And I think there's a huge opportunity for the higher education sector in Cyprus, because we are now reaching a critical mass. We're not talking about 2 or 3 higher education institutes in Cyprus. We're now talking in the excess of 10. So if someone in the region is looking at Cyprus as an option for the higher education needs, and as you said before, for the continuous in life higher education needs, then Cyprus is now beginning to have a very attractive product. You're looking at Africa, an emerging economy. You're looking at Egypt. Egypt is outside our radar, but Egypt's middle class is larger than Greece.
Right? Yes.
And then we're asking, okay, why would an Egyptian study online in Cyprus, or do a short degree or a hybrid degree or something flexible in Cyprus, and not in England, for example, in the UK, where the brand name and the tradition is? And I would say that there is an opportunity. There are risks, of course. But we're starting with very high quality material in terms of teachers and personnel, and we're starting with a very low cost structure that British universities have yet to figure out how to offer courses at a very low cost, but while keeping the quality high. If Cyprus is the first one to do it in the region and build a brand name on this, I think sky is the limit concerning the education sector. So the disruption is absolutely there, and so is the opportunity.
Great, great, great. One of the things that I see is that when I recruit people, especially younger students, it's very difficult to get them to write properly and to reason properly. And because, you know, a lot of that is just due to their prior experience digitally, where they don't need to. They can make a decision much faster in a digital environment, like in a gaming environment or something like that. Or if they have to take digital exams, it can sometimes be far easier just to, you know, plug the numbers into a spreadsheet or do something like that and you know, accelerate the result. Are you seeing issues with writing and reasoning ability? Just in general, I mean, anecdotally, not.
It's so sometimes it's sad. You see people not being able to communicate themselves for a simple image. Very simple.
The Greek, like the Greek language or the French language or the German language, these have a huge amount of like history and like almost intangible knowledge built into them. And yet today, the online environment is all tangible and fast and based on shortcuts. So when my son was, you know, he finished the French school in Athens, he's a top gamer. And he can, in many cases, like the game he'll be on will shut him down because they think he's too fast. They think there's some kind of an AI or something. So, I mean, in that environment, he's like a superhero. But if you ask him, or in the past, you know, if he had to express something in correct French, he would have the hugest problems. And if you ask me to write a sentence in Greek, I have huge problems. Whereas in English,
it is not so much the use of language, the structuring of the thoughts.
Yes.
And I'm going to explain to you right to the point, and I'm going to say the 3 reasons why it should be so, and then come up with a recommendation.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, if someone does this, I don't care about the language, about the grammar. Well, I care about the grammar, but I wouldn't mind a few typos here and there if they are able to get the structure of their thoughts in the right order.
Yeah,
that's what mostly disappoints me.
Yeah. No, we live in very interesting times. I mean, very interesting times. It's there was this idea that you know, we did the first .com crash, and that things kind of became simpler after that. So from 2004-5 onwards, you know, all of these fantastic Web 2.0 platforms came out, like Facebook or, you know, Google, whatever, and they made life a lot easier. But at the same time, then the ripple effect of the changes that they are bringing about into the Web 3.0 and what's coming up, you know, the next 5 or 10 years, these are they're very complex impacts. I mean, and very, very complex dislocations and disruptions are coming up. It's, you know, it's really going to be interesting. I don't know how many people will be able to keep like bridging this gap of the old, you know, the fundamentally traditional system of education that we've had, right, for all of these years, with, you know, how things are changing into the future. I mean, you know, Ioana, Panos, myself, whatever, we're all of a certain generation. We remember what things were like before internet, right? When you're a digital native and literally your whole biology, your hand-eye coordination is different, how you process information is different. You know, I'm not quite sure how we adapt to that. Really not sure. And you know, I've been working with, you know, people who might be 22, 24, 26. They are geniuses at what they do technically, but you cannot put them in front of a client to hold a discussion. You cannot take them to a business lunch because, you know, they have no idea how to eat properly. So I think there are really a lot of changes taking place. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Great.
Philip.
Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.